Today we're going to move on and build up a model of supply and demand based on Unit 8 in our. So prices you can think of as information. During the Civil War, the U.S. Navy's blockade of Confederate states led to a 75% reduction in the supply of American cotton to Britain's textile mills. It also led to a six-fold increase in cotton prices. That led to a shift towards producing cotton in India and away from other crops. It led to the development of technologies to process Indian cotton, and it led to massive investment in these new technologies. So the blockade, through the price mechanism, ultimately led thousands of independent actors to change their actions in response. You can think of market prices like messages. In some conditions, prices provide an accurate measure of the scarcity of a good, and higher prices provide individuals and firms with an incentive to conserve in society's scarce resources. In Unit 7, we were considering monopolistic markets for differentiated goods. In that model, there were many price-taking buyers, but one price-setting seller with the power to choose any feasible price and quantity combination, right, constrained by consumers' demand for the product. In Unit 8, we're going to consider competitive markets for homogeneous goods. Here, there are many price-taking buyers, but there are also many price-taking sellers with no power to choose a price above the market equilibrium price. Price-setting firms then choose the price-quantity combination that maximizes profits. That's what we saw in Unit 7. We'll see that price-taking firms take the prices given and choose only the quantity that maximizes their profit. You can think of the market for used textbooks as a fairly competitive market, right? The market for new textbooks is not similarly competitive, right? Because any given book company, McGraw-Hill or whatever, is always thinking about the downward sloping demand for the book and thinking about whether or not to raise the price and sell it to fewer people or lower the price and sell it to more. Let's think about the demand for used textbooks. We're going to start out with this demand curve showing how much up to 40 different potential customers are willing to pay for the book. Right? Buyers' demand for used textbook is similar to demand for cereal or beautiful cars. Students' willingness to pay will depend on a bunch of things: how interested they are in the subject, how useful they think the textbook will be for the class, right? How much money they or their parents have. You can also represent demand not simply as a curve, right, but as an equation. In this case, the willingness to pay is equal to 20 minus 1/2 Q, where we see when Q equals 0, for example, the willingness to pay of the 0th consumer, which is a somewhat confusing concept, is 20. Right? The first consumer, when Q equals 1, is willing to pay $19.50. And the 40th consumer is willing to pay, right, 20 minus 1/2 of 40. They're willing to pay 0 for a book. There's someone, the 40th person is willing to take the book off your hands, but not pay any money for it. You can also represent the demand as a table, where of course you'd simply put in different values of Q and match that with a corresponding willingness to pay or price in a table like this. Right, where you see the 0th consumer be willing to pay 20, the first $19.50, all the way down to the 40th who's willing to pay nothing. We can use the same method to think about the supply of used textbooks. The supply of used textbooks depends on sellers' willingness to accept. Sellers are lined up from those with the lowest reservation price to those with the highest. In the same way that demand curves line them up from those who are willing to pay the most to those who are willing to pay the least. Right. The 20th seller, for example, in this demand curve, is willing to accept $7 for their textbook. The 40th seller, meanwhile, would need a full $12 to sell their textbook. At a price of $10, right, we could also say 32 books would be supplied. It's because the 32nd person is willing to accept $10, and the 31st, 30th, 29th, and so on, they're also all willing to accept $10 or less, right? So the price of $10, we would get 32 textbooks supplied. Supply can also be represented as an equation, right? In this case, the willing to accept, we see when Q equals 0, right, the willingness to accept is 2, right? And when Q equals 20, for example, the willingness to accept would be 7, right, which is 2 plus 1/4 of 20, 2 plus 5, that equals 7. You could also represent this as a table, although I don't have space to show you that in this particular slide. So what will the market equilibrium price be? Well, markets bring together buyers and sellers. You can think of something like the Grand Bazaar in Istanbul, a famous market, or the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, where futures of corn and soybeans and so on are sold in the United States. And you can think of something like Amazon.com, where there are many people selling a used copy of Greg Mankiw's 7th edition Principles of Economics, and you can buy it for roughly between $55 and $62, it looks like.